Hello, HIN620. It's chapter 4, where we're going to learn about all sorts of joins that help you retrieve data from two or more tables. Because once you have more than one table, you have to join the other two tables together. So that's why the command is called join, surprisingly enough. When you do an inner join, that is you're using the primary key of the first table and joining that to the foreign key of the second table, which I would call your standard join. In fact, it's like so standard that the inner keyword is not really used. It's optional. Sorry for this old query up there. So if you have a very simple query that we've done before of getting the vendor name from the vendors table based on their IDs, you just run it and it gives you the 114 rows. If you take out the inner, it's going to give you the same thing because, again, the inner is optional. So I would call that the more standard join. To do an outer join, that's when you want to join two tables and there may be null values in the second table, but you don't care because you just want to get everything from the first table and see what its value is for the second table. So if we look at an example of that, again, we're selecting vendor name, invoice number, invoice total, and then V, vendors V is the table we're going to join from, and we're going to join it to invoices. And since this says left join, it means that you're going to take all of the values from the table on the left, or the first table, and get the matching values for invoices, even if there aren't any in the invoices table. And then you order by the name. So this is basically the same sort of query as the inner, except you're saying, give me all these vendors regardless of what it matches up to. So if we do that, you see a lot of null values in here. And if we hadn't done the left join, you'd see we wouldn't get the values that didn't have either an invoice number or invoice total. So that's the key there. So left means it's going to take everything from this guy, regardless of what it has in the thing it's joining to, and give you that in your result set. There'll be some more examples later. The chapter also went over the commands or keywords using and natural. I honestly don't use those too often. They're kind of cool, and it's good to know that they're there, but seems like a little overkill. But they're kind of neat where, if you're example like this, if you're doing two tables that have the same column name, you can say using and then vendor ID, and it implies which tables it comes from. So for a good example of a right outer join, we're going to take a look at the example from the slides and from the book using the infamous departments and employees table, which is really one of the standard examples because it really gives you a great idea of how things cross over in sort of a real life example. So what we have here is we have all these list of employees, and each employee has a department number. And then here's the departments table. And if you notice, there's Denise Watson and Paolo Locario have department number 6, but there is no department number for that in here. So if you were to do a sort of regular join, you would lose Paolo and Denise because they wouldn't show up. So if we do this right outer join, saying, so we're going to join employees and departments, and this time the right table, the employees table, is the one I want to say, okay, give me all the people for regardless of whatever else you got. And then it joins the department numbers, and there you go. You have Watson and Locario. And up here, if you did the same sort of thing, you wouldn't have Watson and Lucario because they're not there. Because they were not joined saying, give me all the employees. So there's a good example for that. Let's see. Let's move on to unions, because that's a really good thing to talk about. So to discuss the unions, first of all, the overall idea is that you're taking two select statements and you're basically, gluing together the two results for that. So the key to that is that the columns that you're selecting line up for each one. They don't have to have the same values, but they have to have the same names and extracting the same type of data. I think a perfect example of that is one from the book. So why don't we just kind of go over that one quickly. You want to see which ones are active and which ones are paid. And so you basically hard code the first column as active, because active qualifies where their invoice minus payment minus credit is greater than 0, and paid means that it's less than or equal to 0. So what you're saying is, give me these invoice numbers, invoice date, invoice totals, and label these guys as active if they qualify for this, and label them as paid if they qualify for the other. So it's a great way to do it in one statement, basically, where you're joining all this information together. So if we run the command, you'll see the results that some rows are paid and some rows are active. So all this data was extracted from one table, just getting two different types of information from it and basically putting the two select statements together. So let's look at exercise 3, which asks you to get some data from both the vendors table and the general ledger accounts table, such that you're getting one row for each vendor, regardless of the other information associated with the vendor, and then you're sorting it. So if we take a look at the command that gives you the result, you see that we're selecting the vendor name and its default account number, and you can see that down here. That's what joins it to the account number in the general ledger table, and then you get the account description from the general ledger account. So you want to get it from the vendors, and you want to left join because you want every single vendor regardless of anything else, and then join that with the accounts on the account number, like I said, matching up, the default account number matching up with the account number, and then you order by the account description and the vendor name. And there you go. That's all the information in the table that you need, and it's sorted by the account description. So let's move on to exercise 7, where they want you to use a union operator to generate a result set with the vendor name and the vendor state. And the interesting part about it is that the vendor state, they only care about what is California and what isn't California. So again, you're going to be joining a table to itself, and then hard coding a column based on the results of what the query generates. So you want the vendor name, and then as per the instructions, you want either CA or outside CA. And just to make the output a little bit nicer, I said that this column should be called location in its header. And so it's rather simple, two simple queries put together to make a very powerful query, which is just give me the vendors whose state is California, give me the vendors whose state isn't California, and then order it by name. And so since these both have the same number of columns, it should join up very well. And so let's run it, and there you go. So it's sorted by the vendor names and each one that was from California just says California, and there you go. So that's about it. This is a really important chapter because you really can't do any sort of relational work without understanding joins. So hopefully this gave you a better idea, a little bit of help, and we'll talk to you in the next chapter.